Hi, I'm Nate Summerfield,
And I'm Ben Verdi.
and today we're going to talk to you about the significance of war bonds during and after World War II. World War II was, and still is, the largest war in human history by a number of standards. A total of 1.9 billion soldiers from over 60 countries served in the war. Over 60 million people died, slightly more than 2.5% of the world's population at the time, and an additional 25 million people were injured during the gruesome battles that took place.
In addition to being the most deadly war, World War II was far and away the most expensive war to take place by that time. An estimated $1.25 trillion were spent over the course of World War II, which equates to roughly 16 trillion US dollars in 2014. Overall, the United States alone had spent over $300 billion by the time the war was over.
The United States government, however, had a problem. Taxes and other normal revenue sources could not pay for the war by themselves. Income from taxes paid for less than half of the U.S. expenses over the course of World War II. To fund the war effort, the U.S. government began to issue war bonds. What are war bonds exactly? Well, it's important first to understand what bonds are themselves.
A bond can be thought of as a loan. A bond is issued by a government or a company. The issuer then sells the bond to people for an initial amount, which is also known as a principal.
For example, if the government issues a bond that costs $75, the principal is $75. The issuer then pays the principal back at a predetermined later date, along with paying interest during the interim. The bond is seen as a loan because one person buys it for money up front, and their money is returned from the issuer at a later date.
War bonds are a way for citizens to loan the government money to pay for a war while money is needed, and then get their money back later. The U.S. government issued war bonds to raise money that was necessary to fund World War II. U.S. war bonds at the time were sold in increments of $25 and could be as expensive as $10,000. The money that war bonds were responsible for producing was integral to the United States war effort and wartime economy.
Although war bonds were not fully responsible for America's victory in World War II, they did play a huge role in getting people involved. In addition, the war bonds helped finance the cost of the war and jumpstart the American economy both during and after the war. During World War II, America contributed in many major ways and also aided many Allied countries economically. Without war bonds, America would not have had the funding to impact the war in the ways that they did.
During the war, citizens of the United States were bombarded with encouragement to purchase war bonds. U.S. propaganda posters made the public fearful of the spread of fascism. Many people believed that if they didn't do their part to further the war effort, the United States would soon be overpowered and taken over by a totalitarian dictator. Buying war bonds was an easy way for the public to contribute and also fend off evil fascists.
While posters of Uncle Sam and battle-worn soldiers were strewn among the streets, encouraging citizens to buy bonds, celebrities were playing their part in endorsing the purchase of war bonds. Bob Hope, Frank Sinatra, and Betty Davis traveled across the country supporting and marketing the sale of war bonds in their shows.
Children were even able to purchase war stamps, which would then go into war bond booklets. Once again, the profits from these sales went directly to funding the war. Schools would also hold war bond drives, where students were urged to bring in their pocket change with the goal of providing more for the war effort than other schools around them.
Ads were placed in newspapers all around the country encouraging people to buy the war bonds. They were affordable, convenient, and made a big difference, said the ads, which also contained exciting slogans. The newspapers gave the bonds the exposure they needed, and it wasn't long before they took off.
Soon, everyone wanted to get involved with war bond sales. Even small-town media outlets began to advertise and call for citizens to buy bonds. Here in Wayland, a small newspaper called the Constituent Jeep played a large role in the sale of war bonds in the area.
The Constituent Jeep was a popular town newspaper in Wayland, Massachusetts in the 1940s. During the war, the Jeep wanted to do its part to contribute to the war effort.
The Jeep organized a weekly contest where citizens of the town would donate war bonds to the newspaper, and at the end of the week, a drawing was held to determine the winners of the donated bonds.
The first person to donate a war bond to the Jeep was a man by the name of Albert Lazat. He donated a $25 war bond to the Constituent Jeep, which was ultimately won by a local teenager named Robert Allen.
Servicemen and women were also entered into the pool of possible winners, which allowed soldiers to win bonds that they would receive upon their return to Wayland. A lieutenant by the name of Joseph Strauss dropped out of high school in 1942 with the goal of joining the war effort. Over his time in service, Strauss was the lucky winner of 2 of the Cochituate Jeep's war bonds. It not only delighted the young man, but also excited many of his fellow soldiers to have these bonds waiting for them upon returning home.
Winnings like the ones described were the biggest way the Cochituate Jeep helped to spread the sale of war bonds. The weekly drawings that took place not only spread publicity of war bonds to the town, but also boosted morale and provided a sense of nationalism. Through the purchase of war bonds, citizens of small towns like Wayland could do their part to contribute to the war effort.
By the end of the war, $185.7 billion in war bonds were raised, which equates to more than $4 trillion today. War bonds covered over 60% of the $304 billion spent in the entire war and accounted for more income than taxes during the time period.
Without war bonds, the government would not have been able to fund the wartime manufacturing, and America likely wouldn't have been able to have the profound impact that it did during the war. Bonds and the financial freedom they gave the government helped to jumpstart the American economy once again.
Unemployment levels are considered extraordinarily low when they are around 5.5%, but during World War II, unemployment was consistently around only 1.5%. The money from war bonds allowed the government to put a lot into manufacturing industries, and the country became remarkably productive. American industry produced 15 times as much ammunition, 10 times as many aircrafts and ships during the war, as well as doubling the rubber and aluminum productions and increasing the steel industry by a whopping 50%.
This boost gave the American economy momentum that would last for years after the war. Soon, America became the economic superpower that we know it as today.
War bonds played a large role in getting the whole country involved in the war effort and gave the government funding that would both finance the war and jumpstart the American economy for the future.